February Journal, newspapers, profile of a veteran and the changing times. A special Eyewitness News presentation with News Director Jack Bowe and reporter Andrea Wood.
Hello everybody. Tonight we log two journals that contrast newspaper styles, the old and the new. We'll take a look at the Warren Trib, which is undergoing some major changes in a bid for new readership. But first, Andrea takes a look at a local political writer as he makes the same rounds he's made for over half a century.
Jack, his name is Clingan Jackson. He's the political editor of the Youngstown Vindicator, and as a reporter, he reminds us of the days when newspaper men wore their press cards in their hat and had full roam of politicians' smoke-filled rooms.
One more.
Joey, you gonna have that?
Clingan Jackson, is the mail there? Well, I'll try him later. But maybe I'll get him when he's home. I'll see. Thank you.
At 72, Vindicator political editor Clingan Jackson is still doing what he likes best. Chomping his cigar, calling his contacts, Clingan has gone through many of the same paces for over 50 years. He knows everybody who is anybody in the Valley, and he has watched many of today's office holders grow up in politics. Writing from memory, Clingan questions the effect the steel closings will have on the 1980 presidential race as he cranks out his Sunday column. Nearby, veteran business editor George Reese churns out his copy on labor's efforts to keep the mills open.
I've known Clingan ever since we worked together on the Vindicator, some 50 years now or so. We've had a very pleasant personal relationship all that time. We've collaborated on a number of important things that affect the Youngstown district and in Washington and Columbus and Youngstown, such as the Youngstown Sheet and Tube merger back in 1969, and we worked together on the Lake Erie, Ohio River waterway and other things.
Nearly every morning, George and Clingan take time away from the newsroom to compare notes over coffee.
I've always found he's a very, very pleasant guy to be with. He's always got funny little anecdotes to tell.
Walking through town, they often comment how events they witnessed forced times to change. In 1929, shortly after Clingan's byline first appeared, Youngstown was hard hit with the Depression. 2 years later, Clingan covered the Decoration Day riot as a labor reporter.
I met the first CIO organizers that came into Youngstown as a reporter. And I was very close on the organization of the locals.
Clingan watched the Valley become politically dominated by labor and the emerging Democratic Party. He made many friends as he covered the changing trends, and in 1934, Clingan himself became part of the early New Deal coalition as he traded in his press hat and headed to Columbus for a 2-year term in the legislature.
They asked me. I didn't originate the idea myself. They were forming a Democratic ticket, and there'd never been any Democrats elected here, hardly. And my father told me, he said, well, won't hurt you, good experience, run. And I was elected with about 20,000 majority at the time.
2 years later, Clingan ran for Congress and lost to steelworker Michael Kerwin in the Democratic primary. In 1945, he was voted back to Columbus as a state senator. He soon rose to power as chairman of the Finance Committee.
I wrote the first strip mine law. I was the author of the law creating the Department of Natural Resources. In that session, I passed 27 bills. One of them changed the fiscal year.
In 1950, Clingan lost his Senate seat to steelworker Charles Carney, and he returned to his typewriter. 8 years later, he ran for governor and proposed a far-reaching platform. The primary campaign cost just $4,000, and as Clingan puts it, he finished far down the list.
I don't know, Clingan, you're going to box me in.
That's my purpose.
Today, Clingan is considered one of the foremost authorities on state government, politics, and history. Making the rounds each morning, he kibitzes with old friends about the upcoming congressional race, questioning whether the election of Republican Lyle Williams represents a fluke or the beginning of new voting trends.
Gentleman in the office now, Lyle Williams, he seems to be every place and everywhere, and it's surprising how he gets around. And he cuts into some districts that I know is dominated by our Democratic Party.
He has some Democratic supporters, doesn't he?
He must have, according to the actions.
As with many of the area's political leaders, Clingan and Bushel began talking politics a long time ago. In 1957, Olenek witnessed Clingan being sworn in as a member of the State Pardon Board. Clingan had previously served on a commission to streamline government, and as chairman of the Highway Construction Council, Clingan drew up the state's existing road system. Since 1963, he's been a member of the Ohio Civil Rights Commission.
Any politician that knows Clingan Jackson has to be along with Clingan or they're not on first base in this political game. And I happen to be one of the guys on first base, and I scored. The only thing I can understand, he seems to be on both sides of the fence. He's in with the Republicans and with the Democrats. No matter who the governor of Ohio is, appoints him on some commissions. And why do they do that? Because he knows the game of politics.
For Clingan Jackson, the game of politics is his heritage. In 1804, Clingan's descendants settled in Old Coatesville Township. During the Civil War, the Jacksons established a homestead on 300 acres that included part of McKelvey Lake. Clingan is conscious of those roots. He's lived most of his life on family property, and he vividly remembers tales about his grandfather serving as Mahoning County Commissioner when Canfield lost the county seat to Youngstown.
This area, a good deal of this land was once the land of my grandfather, Joseph Jackson. One time it was on the old county maps marked Satanville. One of the hired men was trying to tease my aunt, and he put up signs around a mile, half a mile to Satanville. And my grandfather was the commissioner at the time, and so he just had the name entered officially, and you look at the old Mahoning County records and you'll see it marked Satanville. The family always talked politics, and the family reunions were always politically divided between the descendants of those who were born before the Civil War and those who were born in the 60s and grew up in the period of Reconstruction and became Democrats. One of my first memories was of my father opening the front door on a snowy day and announcing that Wilson was elected in 1912. It's home to me, and there's so many things here that mean something to me. Associations when I was a child.
You were born in the house next door.
Yeah, that's right.
And you grew up in the area, although not just here.
Yeah, that's right.
When you go out and get in your car each day and go down to the Vindicator, what do you think when you pass and you look around and here's everything that the Jackson family has really stood for over these years?
Well, you have a feeling that you want to stay, that it's yours. Not only the plot you live in, but the surrounding scenery, in a sense, belongs to you. That's the way you feel about it. And I'm oriented here. This is where I would want to remain the rest of my life.
Covering the beat he's watched longer than anyone else, Clingan has a personal commitment. He knows there are some who call him an old-timer who has seen his best years, but in his mind, the best is what he makes it, and that means always staying in touch.
I see nothing wrong with retirement, but I think people, when they retire, have to plan activities that they want to carry on. And I'm so circumstanced that it seems to me better to just keep on working as long as I'm worthwhile to who I'm working for.
Now, do you ever get the feeling that some of the people in the newsroom are wondering, gee, I wish I could have his job?
Yeah, once in a while they ask me about how Grover Cleveland made out in the election or something, indicating that I belong to a past generation or something.
0730 hours this day from Caroline here, Belmont.
Clingan has seen enough to know the latest generation of reporters will live to see a whole lot more. Over the years, he's helped many cub reporters come up through the ranks, and he's taught students of public opinion, including George Gallup, the fine art of political polling. During his long career, Clingan has also watched mass communications come of age. With the advent of television and radio, and the idea that the medium is the message, Clingan has seen the focus shift to youth and fast-paced news. He has the perspective of one who has had to adjust.
Newspapers have changed so much that it gets pretty difficult for an old newspaper man to keep up. I'm mostly a pencil man, if you know what I mean, and it was a difficult time for me originally getting used to a typewriter. And after, in recent years, they've made so many changes that the mechanical end of it is kind of astounding to me. I think that most newspaper men kind of didn't like it very well when the television crews took over the center stage at the national political conventions, for example. And the newspaper people have just had competition, and they're pushed back a little bit.
Do you like what's happened to the way the news is reported?
I suppose it's more interesting and maybe reaches more people, but I have considerable doubts about the people being informed quite as well as they once were in newspaper work. Now, that applies not only to television and radio, but to newspapers themselves. The style in newspaper reporting has changed more toward attracting the reader. There's less of what you would call thorough analysis and that sort of thing. And there is less interest in having a newspaper man representing a paper at Columbus that knew virtually everything that was going on in state government, but they had them then. As an old reporter, I can't believe that the young reporters are quite as good as the old ones.
Oh, Clingan. Even me? You didn't answer.
Well, I meant that the way I said it. It's a part of growing old. You get those ideas, you know.
February Journal will continue.
It's true that since the glory days of American newspapers in the 20s, the days of Ben Hecht and Damon Runyon, head-to-head competition between newspapers in most American cities has died. But readers in the Mahoning Valley are getting the benefit of some serious competition between the Vindicator and the Warren Tribune Chronicle. It's not so much a battle for circulation as it is a tug-of-war over contrasting styles and philosophies. The Trib is the second oldest paper in the state. Its origins go back further than even the Vindicator. But in its newly found competitive drive, it might be called the new kid on the block. When William Randolph Hearst started the whole business of turning newspapers into dynasties and national opinion molders, he did it with what many called yellow journalism. Sensational murder cases, society divorces, the kidnapping of children of the famous. That was the stuff that made for big headlines and brought out the newspaper boys hawking extras. It was the razzle-dazzle approach of the Hearst newspapers that built the huge publishing empires. As competing newspapers died off in many cities, some publishers seem content to protect their territorial rights, but others see it differently.
I think the difference between a newspaper and another business is that we're all in here for making money, yes, but the difference between the newspaper is a community service, I feel, and it can't just make money. I mean, it has some other commitments and things it has to look at. So you have to serve the community. You can't just be in there raking in the shekels, I don't think. We would like to cover Trumbull County completely, and of course the southeastern part of it is covered by them now, and I mean Liberty, Girard, and Hubbard, and we intend to eventually get we hope to get more readers from that area. We don't want to go into Mahoning County. I feel that we have enough in our backyard here. If we can just get that cleaned up, I'd be really pleased.
Zell Draws is vice president and general manager of the Warren Trib. She's also the granddaughter of Zell Hart Deming, a young widow who started the paper in 1924 as society editor and drove her way to the top within 4 years. For most of the 20th century, the Trib has been managed at the top by women, specifically grandmother, mother, and daughter. There were some internal power struggles within that matriarchy, and when Mrs. Draws emerged, there was a decision to upgrade the quality of the paper to attract readers in the growth areas of the Mahoning Valley.
We hope right now our short-range goal, although it may turn into a long-range goal, is to have 50,000 circulation. And I see, along with Jim Reinhardt and some other people here in town, that the growth will be north. And I expect that we'll expand. You know, Cortland's growing very fast, and I see that our circulation going, I see our circulation going up that way, hopefully in the not-too-distant future.
That decision to compete for new readers took two directions: a new look for the paper and new people, young people with new ideas. One of the keys to the new look is 29-year-old Dale Peskin, the Trib's managing editor. Peskin is the man responsible for turning ideas into print. He's a former reporter for the Youngstown Vindicator who was brought in as part of the new breed.
So, the thrust has to certainly come in a couple of ways. I mean, you've got to be sensitive to readership patterns, and you've got to be sensitive to the ways in which you cover the community. It all begins with the reporter. I mean, the newspaper is only as good as the reporters and the people who are bringing the news to people every day. And I think the way to do that is with new, aggressive people who are willing to go after stories and not necessarily be interested in making friends or appeasing somebody, but simply being aggressive about it. We've surrounded ourselves with people who are willing to do that.
When you glance across the newsroom of the Trib, the first thing that strikes your attention is the age of the reporters typing their stories into a computer. The new technology comes easy to the young journalists, and they're eager to learn.
In most ways, they're really not tied to the story as closely as experienced reporters. I mean, they're willing to thrust headlong into the story, not worrying about the implications so much, and spend more time being aggressive about it. On the other hand, I mean, they don't understand the way things work quite as well, and it may take them longer to do the story or really to understand the story. And you know, with inexperienced reporters, I think you've got to be a better editor to make sure that they're careful about their facts, to appreciate what it is they're doing, and to make sure that they're not careless or sloppy. But that's something editors always ought to do.
Is there such a thing as being on a beat so long that you become part of that beat, part of that story, and do not look at it as a reporter, but as part of the scene?
Sure there is. And it's a fine line. I mean, the line between experience and friendship, and those are decisions that reporters and editors really have to explore and make. We try to change beats every couple of years around here, just to give it a fresh perspective, so we can be aggressive about it and not be accused of being in bed with one institution or another.
One proof of Peskin's belief in youth on the beat is John Greeman, another transplant from the Youngstown Vindicator, in whom the Trib placed a major effort to prove that it was serious about its image. Greeman was assigned a major investigative role to probe the Lakes LTV merger, which some believe led to the ultimate shutdown of Youngstown Sheet and Tube, a decision that began the demise of steel in the valley.
That series for me was a matter of 3 solid months' work spaced over, say, 6 months. It was a series that brought me into contact with people that you otherwise wouldn't meet as a reporter for a small daily newspaper like the Tribune Chronicle. People like a former Attorney General, people like the antitrust chief for the Justice Department, top people in the Senate, and that was a very good experience. If there was a difficulty, it was trying to understand the story. I worked on it for 3.5, 4 months before I had much of a sense of what the story was. We knew it was a big story, but we just didn't know what the lead was. I think importantly, the Lakes LTV merger series represents the commitment that this newspaper has to big stories, to stories that take a lot of time, to stories that cost the newspaper a great deal of money in terms of travel costs. And I'm pleased to work for a newspaper that's willing to make that kind of investment.
Both Greeman and Peskin say they could not have done the story while they were reporters at the Vindicator.
When Peskin was working for the Vindicator and I was working for the Tribune, we were competing for the Lakes LTV merger story. When he came to the Tribune as managing editor, I think the Vindicator lost its best hope for coverage of a big story. And my sense is that Dale really wasn't replaced there, and the same kind of initiative just doesn't remain.
Well, you say as a Vindicator reporter that you were aware of the possibilities of the story. I assume then that editors on the Vindicator were also aware of the significance of it. Had you stayed there, do you think the story would have eventually made it in the Vindicator?
Oh, there's no question it wouldn't have. I mean, I would never have been permitted to pursue the story. I mean, I did some coverage of the day-to-day breaking situations for them, and they gave me pretty good flexibility in that. But it was clear that they didn't want to go any farther. Jones and Laughlin was upset about much of my coverage, and ultimately I was taken off the story because they were upset.
What some reporters view as suppression of stories could actually be attempts by publishers as community leaders to solve community problems quietly without the focus of press scrutiny. Even Trib editor Zell Draws admits that a paper sometimes must pull in its horns a little.
I feel we should boost and should push for things that we feel are going to be good for all of us. Because after all, if more people come here and if we have more businesses here, this is going to help the newspaper too. But it's a mutual thing. You can't have one without the other, I don't believe.
February Journal will continue.
Less than a week after we filmed that report on the Warren Trib Chronicle, managing editor Dale Peskin was seriously injured in an automobile accident. We're very happy to report tonight that he's doing well, and they expect him back on the job in about a month. Incidentally, some press critics of the Trib series claim that, well, it really didn't tell us anything new or revealing. In fact, some sources that were close to the Vindicator at the time say that their role in the 1969 Lakes Sheet and Tube merger, they say the paper was at the forefront in trying to help the Valley Steel even back in the 60s.
That's very true, Jack. In fact, quietly working behind the scenes using the numerous contacts the veteran reporters had built up over the years, the Vindicator did its best to try and stop what the paper believed was the eventual doom Youngstown Sheet and Tube would face with out-of-town ownership. They found out when they tried to exercise this clout that the lobbyists had already gone a little bit too far down in Washington and they were not successful. But they felt for many years that this would bring on the demise of Youngstown steelmaking, and apparently they were right.
Don't you think, though, that that kind of backroom strategy by newspaper people may be becoming a thing of the past? And I'm wondering if some of the attention that we give to strict non-alliances by politicians may just spill over into our own performance as journalists. Anyway, it's something we'll have to look forward to in the future, and it's a story that we're all interested in because, really, like our morning cup of coffee, we get awfully used to our newspapers. That's Journal for tonight. We'll be back in a month with March Journal. Good evening.
Good night.
Good reporting has nothing to do with age. What you don't know and experience, you can generally make up in energy and research, and vice versa. I mean, there's no substitute for good fundamental reporting, and it doesn't matter if you're 21 or 65.
Generally, young people are pretty good about old people. Sometimes they flare at them a little bit. They don't respond quite as quick as young people do, I'm sure of that.
Hey, Gare! There it is. One more!
February Journal is a special presentation of 33 Eyewitness News. Journal will return March 23rd.